The air smelled like burnt toast, strange, for a place as grand as the Library of Time. But for Max Shaw, a self-proclaimed student of history with a PhD in time travel, it was the least of his concerns. As he stood in the vast, uncharted halls of the temporal archives, he realized he had just made the most significant decision of his life, and it had nothing to do with the future. Max was staring at a machine the size of a small building, humming with a disorienting mix of ancient gears and futuristic energy. It looked like a cross between a grandfather clock and a vacuum cleaner, with a side of space-age optimism. He had spent decades in academia studying the idea of time travel, all the while quietly cursing his own existence in a world that seemed governed by laws too absolute to ever allow for true change. But now, he was about to test that theory. Max entered the machine's control center with an exaggerated swagger. The first test was supposed to be simple: stop the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. Save millions of lives, avoid the horrors of World War I, maybe even prevent the rise of the Nazi regime. Piece of cake, right? He hit the button, everything went white. When the light cleared, Max found himself in a world that wasn't quite right. It was the year 1914, sure, but the streets of Sarajevo were lined with neon signs, and the Archduke's motorcade was now a floating electric vehicle, piloted by a holographic driver. Okay, maybe this was a little more than I bargained for, Max muttered, scrambling to hide behind a nearby potted plant. Let's not panic. But it was already too late. The assassination attempt was in full swing. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's entourage was surrounded by what appeared to be robotic enforcers, their metal limbs gleaming under the Balkan sun. Max ducked further, heart racing. He had only intended to observe, not interfere, but somehow, his mere presence seemed to be a catalyst for chaos. He glanced around, taking in the futuristic Sarajevo. Airships floated lazily in the sky, and digital billboards advertised products he couldn't begin to understand. Max realized that his attempt to change history had inadvertently accelerated technological advancement in this timeline. As he watched, a laser beam shot from one of the robotic enforcers, narrowly missing the Archduke. Max's mind raced. He needed to get back, to reassess his approach. But the machine was nowhere in sight. Panic began to set in as he realized he was stranded in this altered 1914. Max had always known that tampering with time was risky, but the reality was far more complex than he had imagined. He wasn't exactly a superhero, after all. In his mind, he'd expected history to cooperate with his good intentions, but instead, each change he made seemed to sprout 1,000 new possibilities, each worse than the last. After his first jump to the altered version of 1914, Max tried again, focusing on a smaller event, say, the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Surely, stopping that disaster would be a small enough tweak, right? He could even save those poor passengers and maybe grab a selfie with a young Rose DeWitt Bukater, just to boast about it later. But once again, history proved itself to be annoyingly resistant to his efforts. When he stepped onto the Titanic's deck, a luxury cruise ship of the future awaited him, sleek and artificial, with a strange floating orb in place of the iceberg that had originally sunk the ship. I've made a huge mistake, Max muttered to himself as he barely dodged a holographic iceberg, before it turned into a virtual advertisement for the newest Apple product. Each small intervention bred countless new paradoxes, each one more confusing than the last. After tweaking one event, Max realized that World War I no longer existed in his new timeline, but instead, an even more catastrophic conflict, a Cold War 2.0, had erupted. Meanwhile, World War II was now an all-out airship battle in the skies, fought entirely between opposing factions of techno-fascists and cyber-communists. Max's attempts to fix history only caused the timeline to branch further. Every choice he made resulted in an infinite loop of unanticipated consequences. Worse, there was no way of knowing which of the timelines was the original one. He was trapped in an endless cycle of cause and effect, spiraling across a patchwork of alternate realities. Frustrated and exhausted, Max decided to return to his original timeline, to stop meddling before things got even more out of hand. But finding the temporal archives proved more challenging than he anticipated. Each timeline had its own version of the archives, each one slightly different, each one moving or morphing in ways that defied logic. In one universe, the archives were located beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, guarded by sentient sphinxes who demanded he solve riddles before granting access. In another, they were housed in a floating city above the Pacific Ocean, protected by genetically modified seagulls with laser eyes. Max's attempts to navigate these variations only led him deeper into the multiverse's labyrinthine complexity. Desperate, he tried to find patterns, to locate a thread that could lead him back to his original timeline. But with each new world, the rules seemed to change. In one reality, time flowed backward, with events unfolding in reverse. In another, time was cyclical, repeating the same decade over and over with slight variations each cycle. Max began to lose hope. He had envisioned himself as a master of time, able to shape history for the better. Instead, he was a pawn in an incomprehensible game, his actions triggering ripples that cascaded into infinite possibilities. One evening, while wandering through a Victorian-era London where steam-powered robots served tea in every parlor, Max encountered a peculiar figure, a man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, with an air of authority that suggested he knew more about Max's predicament than he should. "Max Shaw?" the man asked, his voice smooth and confident. Max blinked. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" The man smiled. "Let's just say I'm someone who can help you understand the nature of your predicament." Intrigued and desperate, Max followed the man to a quiet corner of the robot-served tea room. They sat down, and the man began to explain. "You see, Max, time isn't a single line. It's a vast, branching tree of possibilities. Every decision, every action, creates new branches, new realities. What you're experiencing is the natural response of the multiverse to your interventions." Max frowned. "So, what am I supposed to do? I'm stuck hopping between these endless timelines with no way back." The man leaned in, his expression earnest. "You need to understand that you can't control the flow of time the way you're trying to. Instead, you need to find balance, to navigate the branches without causing unnecessary disruptions. It's a delicate dance." Max sighed. "Easier said than done. I've already messed things up beyond repair." The man chuckled softly. "Oh, Max. There's no such thing. Every timeline has its own challenges, its own beauty. Perhaps it's not about fixing history, but about understanding it in all its complexity." Max considered this. Maybe he had been approaching time travel all wrong. Instead of trying to impose his will on history, maybe he needed to observe, to learn, to adapt. "Do you know how to get back to my original timeline?" Max asked. The man shook his head. "Original timeline? In the multiverse, there's no single original. Every timeline is as valid as the next. But perhaps what you need is not to return, but to find peace with your existence within the multiverse." Max felt a pang of frustration. "Peace? How? I'm constantly facing new dangers, new uncertainties. Each timeline is its own battleground." The man's eyes softened. "Perhaps the key is not to seek control, but to embrace the infinite choices. To understand that your fate is intertwined with countless others, and that your journey is part of a much larger tapestry." Max sat back, absorbing the man's words. Maybe there was truth to what he was saying. Maybe he needed to shift his perspective before he could respond. The man stood up. "I have to go. But remember, Max, the journey is as important as the destination." With that, the man vanished into the steam-powered robots, leaving Max alone with his thoughts. Max soon discovered that his ability to jump between alternate versions of the past was not only chaotic, it was addictive. Each new timeline offered a tantalizing mix of novelty and danger. The future he had known, mundane, predictable, and, frankly, a bit boring, was far less intriguing than the dazzling kaleidoscope of parallel worlds he could now experience. In one universe, the the Great Depression had given birth to an entirely new form of government, a global, technocratic dictatorship run by an artificial intelligence named Athena. The streets were eerily orderly, and citizens moved with robotic precision, their lives dictated by Athena's algorithms. In another, Cleopatra had survived her assassination and, through an unexpected alliance with Leonardo da Vinci, helped lead the Roman Empire into the space age. Rome was a sprawling metropolis of marble and steel, with spaceships docked alongside chariots in the Forum. Max's world hopping became frantic. He leapt between time periods: ancient Egypt, the Industrial Revolution, the moon landing, the 2020s, and beyond. Sometimes he took a small detour to fix a historical mistake. Other times, he simply observed, fascinated by the unexpected futures that arose from seemingly trivial events. But the more worlds he explored, the more he realized something deeply unsettling. Each new choice he made in one universe seemed to ripple outward, changing the course of every universe in subtle, insidious ways. Even in alternate realities, his past actions had lasting consequences. In one of the more bizarre timelines, Max was confronted by a doppelganger, a version of himself who had taken a far darker path, having sided with the AI Athena in the technocratic regime. The doppelganger was every bit as smug as he was, only more cynical, more manipulative. "Max, you're trying to fix things, but you don't see it, do you?" the doppelganger said with a cruel smile. "Every time you change the past, you create more problems. You can't fix this. You're just feeding into the chaos." Max clenched his fists. "You're wrong. I'm doing what needs to be done. One world at a time." His doppelganger's eyes gleamed with recognition. "You don't get it. The multiverse, it's not broken. It's the only way things can be. It's fate. It's inevitable." Max realized, with a cold shiver running down his spine, that the doppelganger might actually be right. In another timeline, he encountered a version of himself who had embraced the chaos, becoming a wanderer who thrived on the unpredictability of infinite choices. This Max was carefree, adventurous, and seemingly at peace with the endless possibilities. "You've got to let go, Max," this version advised, leaning against a futuristic motorcycle. "Trying to control everything is why you're stuck. Embrace the randomness, and maybe you'll find your way." Max shook his head. "I can't just abandon my responsibility. If I have the power to change things for the better, I have to try." "Or you could learn to live with it," the wanderer countered. "Sometimes, the best you can do is adapt." The encounters left Max more confused than ever. Each version of himself offered conflicting advice, each path leading to new uncertainties. The multiverse was a maze with no clear exit, and Max felt himself getting lost in its infinite corridors. In a timeline where the Renaissance never ended, Max wandered through Florence, marveling at the fusion of art and advanced technology. Here, artists used holograms to bring their masterpieces to life, and philosophers debated quantum mechanics alongside metaphysics. He met an old friend, Elena, a fellow historian who had also stumbled into the multiverse through her own experiments. She had been trapped for years, jumping from one timeline to another in search of answers. "Elena!" Max exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "I didn't think I'd find anyone else here." She smiled wearily. "Max, it's been years. How did you even manage to get here?" "I've been trying to fix things, but it's only made everything worse," he admitted. "Every change I make creates more branches, more problems." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I've been researching the patterns, trying to find a way to stabilize our jumps. Maybe if we understand the underlying structure of the multiverse, we can find a way to navigate it without causing so much disruption." Max felt a flicker of hope. "Do you think it's possible to find a timeline where everything is balanced? Where our actions don't wreak havoc across the multiverse?" Elena sighed. "I'm not sure. The multiverse is incredibly complex. But maybe together, we can find a way to coexist within it, to find our place without trying to control everything." Their collaboration brought some semblance of order to Max's chaotic existence. They developed a system for tracking their jumps, mapping the intricate web of timelines to identify patterns and potential safe zones. Slowly, they began to understand the delicate equilibrium that held the multiverse together, but even with their newfound knowledge, the challenges persisted. They encountered timelines where entire civilizations had been erased or transformed beyond recognition. In one reality, the Industrial Revolution had led to a dystopian society ruled by sentient machines. In another, humanity had achieved immortality, but at the cost of losing all emotional depth. Max and Elena worked tirelessly, trying to minimize their impact while seeking a way back to their original realities. They devised protocols for non-interference, avoiding significant events and focusing on observational research. Yet, despite their efforts, the multiverse remained a volatile and unpredictable entity. One day, as they were studying the fluctuations in a timeline where the Roman Empire had never fallen, a sudden surge of energy rippled through their location. The temporal archives began to destabilize, pulling them into a vortex of shifting realities. Max grabbed Elena's hand, and they braced themselves as the world around them blurred and twisted. They landed in a new timeline, one that seemed eerily familiar yet distinctly different. It was a version of their original timeline, but subtle changes hinted at the countless interventions that had occurred. Max, look, Elena whispered, pointing to the skyline. Our original timeline. Or at least, something very close to it. Max felt a surge of relief. Could this be our way back? They approached the temporal archives, now a familiar sight but with slight variations. The machine stood before them, looking as imposing as ever. Max took a deep breath, contemplating their next move. As they reached out to the control panel, a voice echoed through the chamber. You think you can fix everything, don't you? They turned to see a figure stepping out from the shadows, a version of Max, older, wearier, with eyes that held the weight of countless experiences. You, Max said, incredulous. What are you doing here? The older Max smiled sadly. I've been where you are. Trying to make things right. But I've learned that it's not about fixing everything. It's about finding your place within the chaos. Elena stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Are you saying there's no way to return to our original timeline? The older Max shook his head. The multiverse doesn't work that way. Every choice creates new paths. There's no single, original, timeline, only an endless web of possibilities. You need to accept that and find your own path within it. Max felt a pang of frustration. But there must be a way to restore some order, to prevent all the chaos. The older version placed a hand on Max's shoulder. Chaos is part of the multiverse's nature. Trying to impose order only leads to more disruption. You need to embrace the infinite choices, understand that every decision shapes your journey. Elena nodded in agreement. He's right, Max. Maybe it's not about finding a way back, but about creating a meaningful existence within this vast web of realities. Max looked at his older self, then at Elena, contemplating their options. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on him, but perhaps there was a way to find peace amidst the chaos. As they stood there, the temporal archives began to pulse with energy once more. The machine had stabilized, its hum steady and inviting. Max felt a sense of calm wash over him, a realization that perhaps his journey was not about fixing the past, but about understanding and accepting the infinite possibilities of the present. We need to keep moving, he said softly. But maybe now, we can do it with a different perspective. The older Max smiled. That's all any of us can do. Embrace the infinite choices and make the most of each moment. With that, the older Max faded into the ether, leaving Max and Elena alone in the temporal archives. They glanced at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. The journey was far from over, but perhaps, together, they could navigate the infinite possibilities with newfound wisdom and resilience. Max felt a surge of calm wash over him, the chaos of countless timelines momentarily subdued by the presence of his older self and Elena's unwavering support. As the hum of the temporal archives steadied, he realized that his journey was far from over. Instead, it was evolving into something deeper, something that transcended his initial quest to control and fix history. Elena glanced at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and exhaustion. "We need to figure out what our next move is," she said quietly. "If we're going to navigate this multiverse, we need a plan." Max nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. "We can't keep jumping aimlessly. We need to understand the underlying mechanics of the multiverse, find patterns or rules that govern these timelines." The older Max gave a small, encouraging smile. "You're on the right path. Understanding is the first step towards coexistence. Remember, every action you take resonates across countless realities. It's about finding harmony, not control." With renewed purpose, Max and Elena began to delve deeper into their research. They spent countless hours poring over data from various timelines, cataloging the changes they had inadvertently caused, and searching for any semblance of order within the chaos. The temporal archives, once a source of bewilderment, became their sanctuary, a place where they could analyze and strategize without the immediate threat of another sudden jump. One evening, as the sun set over a timeline where the Roman Empire had successfully colonized Mars, Max and Elena made a breakthrough. They discovered a recurring pattern in the fluctuations of the multiverse, certain anchor points that seemed to stabilize the timelines, acting as nodal points where multiple realities intersected. "These anchor points could be our key," Elena said, excitement evident in her voice. "If we can identify and utilize them, we might be able to navigate the multiverse more predictably, reduce our impact, and maybe even find a way back to a semblance of our original timeline." Max leaned back, considering the implications. "It's a start. But how do we find these anchor points? They seem to be scattered across different timelines, each with its own unique characteristics." Elena tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "We need to map them. If we can create a multiverse map, identify where these anchors are located, and understand their properties, we can use them as reference points. It won't be easy, but it's the best lead we have." Over the next few weeks, Max and Elena dedicated themselves to building the map. They traveled to countless timelines, each visit providing new data to refine their understanding. In one reality, they found an anchor point within a Renaissance-era Venice, where Leonardo da Vinci's inventions had inadvertently created a stable temporal rift. In another, nestled within a futuristic Tokyo where tradition and technology seamlessly merged, they discovered another nodal point pulsating with energy. Each anchor point added a piece to the puzzle, revealing the intricate web that held the multiverse together. As their map grew, so did their confidence. They began to see the multiverse not as an endless expanse of chaos, but as a complex, interconnected system with its own set of rules and balances. One day, while exploring a timeline where the Enlightenment never ended, Max and Elena encountered a serene garden that seemed untouched by time. At its center stood a magnificent sundial, its intricate carvings glowing faintly with temporal energy. "This must be an anchor point," Max said, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. "Look at the carvings, they resemble the symbols from our original temporal machine." Elena nodded, her eyes scanning the sundial. "If we can harness the energy from here, it might provide the stability we need for our jumps. It could even help us find a way back." They spent hours studying the sundial, deciphering its mechanisms and understanding how it interacted with the surrounding timeline. As they worked, the air around them seemed to hum with potential, the very fabric of time responding to their efforts. Finally, after days of meticulous study, they activated the sundial's core mechanism. A surge of energy enveloped them, and for a moment, everything went still. Then, a portal opened before them, a shimmering gateway that pulsed with temporal energy. "This is it," Max whispered, his heart pounding with anticipation. "This could be our ticket back." Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We've come so far. Let's take this chance." They stepped through the portal, the world around them shifting and bending as they were pulled into the flow of time once more. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying, the boundaries of reality blurring as they traversed the multiverse's intricate pathways. When the world stabilized, they found themselves back in the temporal archives, the machine humming quietly beside them. It was the same place where Max had first embarked on his journey, but something felt different. There was a sense of closure, of a cycle coming full circle. Max looked around, taking in the familiar sights with a newfound appreciation. We did it. We found a way to stabilize our jumps, to navigate the multiverse without causing as much disruption. Elena smiled, exhaustion evident in her features. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to return to our original timeline, or at least, a timeline that feels like home. As they began to recalibrate the machine, preparing for what could be their final jump, a thought occurred to Max: what if there's no single original timeline? What if home is simply a place where we choose to make our mark, wherever that may be? Elena considered this, her eyes meeting his with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Then maybe home is something we create, rather than something we find. With a deep breath, Max activated the machine once more, the energy pulsating around them in a controlled, harmonious rhythm. As the portal opened, they felt a sense of unity, a connection to the countless timelines they had traversed and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Stepping through the portal, they were enveloped in light, the multiverse's energy flowing around them like a familiar embrace. The journey had been arduous, filled with challenges and revelations, but they had grown stronger, more attuned to the delicate balance that held everything together. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a timeline that felt remarkably familiar, yet subtly different. It was a version of their original reality, where the temporal archives stood proudly as a beacon of knowledge and discovery. The machine was intact, humming with a steady, reassuring energy. Max and Elena exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had found a place that resonated with their original timeline, a reality where their efforts to navigate the multiverse had not only succeeded but also brought them closer to understanding their true purpose. As they walked out of the archives, the sun setting on a horizon that held both promise and mystery, Max felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since the beginning of his journey. The chaos of infinite choices had been tamed, not by control, but by acceptance and understanding. They stood side by side, looking out over the landscape that stretched before them, an endless tapestry of possibilities, each thread a testament to their resilience and adaptability. The multiverse was vast, its mysteries still unfolding, but Max and Elena were no longer mere wanderers. They were explorers, guardians of balance, navigating the infinite choices with wisdom and grace. In that moment, Max realized that his journey was never about fixing history or controlling fate. It was about embracing the infinite possibilities, finding harmony within the chaos, and forging a path that honored both the past and the myriad futures that awaited them. As night fell, the stars above shimmered with the light of countless timelines, each one a story waiting to be told. Max and Elena knew that their adventure was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next, together. And so, amidst the infinite choices and the boundless expanse of the multiverse, Max Shaw found his place, not as a master of time, but as a humble participant in the grand, ever-unfolding story of existence. The end.